He kicked me in front of his friends like I was nothing. That was the moment I decided to ruin him in ways he'd never see coming. Stay with me as I walk you through everything that happened. And if this story makes you feel something, I'd love for you to stick around, show some support, and share it with people who might need to hear it. My name is Aaliyah Carter, and for the longest time, I thought I had it all figured out. At 26, I was building my career, paying my own bills, and finally feeling like life was steady. Then I met Malik Johnson. He was 28, confident, smooth-talking, and had this smile that made me believe I could trust him. He came into my life like a storm I wasn't ready for, and at first, I thought it was love. Malik had a circle of friends that he carried around like an accessory. They were loud, always dressed to impress, and never missed a chance to remind me that I wasn't one of them. Still, I ignored the feeling of being judged, because Malik made me believe I was special when we were alone. He'd cook for me sometimes, hold me close, and whisper about a future where we'd have kids and a house. That was the version of him I fell for. But slowly, things shifted. Around his friends, Malik was different. He tried too hard to look strong, like he needed to prove something. It started small, sarcastic jokes at my expense, comments about how I talk too much or don't know how to chill. His friends would laugh, and I would force a smile even though it stung. When it was just the two of us, he'd tell me I was overreacting, that it was just jokes. I wanted to believe him, so I stayed quiet. The more time passed, the worse it got. I noticed how his friends almost encouraged him to put me down, like they fed off it. They'd laugh when he interrupted me, smirk when he dismissed my opinions. Malik seemed to love the attention. I told myself I was being too sensitive, but deep down, I was collecting every little moment like puzzle pieces. One night, we were out at a bar with his crew, and I could feel it again, that switch in him. He wasn't the man who held me at night. He was someone else. Someone who needed to make me small so he could look big. That's when it happened. He kicked my leg under the table, hard enough to make me stumble in my seat, and his friends burst out laughing like it was the funniest thing they had seen all night. I sat there frozen, my face burning with humiliation, my heart pounding like it would break through my chest. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. That was the exact second I knew. This wasn't about love anymore. This was about revenge. And I was going to take everything he thought he had. The first red flags started small, almost quiet, like whispers I tried to ignore. Malik had this way of changing when his friends were around. When it was just the two of us, he could be so gentle. He'd make me breakfast, kiss my forehead, and call me his queen. But the moment his friends showed up, it was like a switch flipped. He became someone else, someone louder, sharper, and meaner. The first time it happened, we were all hanging out in his living room. One of his friends cracked a joke about women not knowing how to drive, and Malik looked straight at me and said, "Yeah, Aaliyah drives like a grandma. I swear I could walk faster than her car." Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, but inside it stung. I wanted to defend myself, but the way they were all laughing made me shrink. Later that night, when I brought it up, Malik brushed it off. "Babe, it's just jokes. Don't be so sensitive." I tried to believe him. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was too soft. But then it kept happening. At a dinner one evening, his friend asked him why he hadn't proposed yet, and Malik, without even thinking, said, "Man, I'm still waiting for her to learn how to cook like a real woman." Everyone roared with laughter. I just sat there, staring at my plate, cheeks burning. Afterward, he put his arm around me like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just humiliated me in front of a table full of people. I kept telling myself it wasn't that serious. He was good to me when no one else was around. He'd hug me, hold me tight, and tell me I was all he needed. But those private words started to feel empty compared to the way he acted in public. I started noticing how his friends seemed to encourage it. Every time Malik made fun of me, they'd laugh harder, like they were rewarding him for it. And he loved it. He loved the attention, the validation, the way it made him look like the alpha of the group. At first, I swallowed it. I told myself, he loves me when we're alone. That's what matters. But love shouldn't need an audience to turn cruel. The jokes turned sharper. He started interrupting me whenever I tried to join their conversations. If I expressed an opinion, he'd mock me, saying things like, "Here she goes again," acting like she knows everything. His friends would smirk, and I'd go silent. I began keeping quiet in group settings, too afraid of being the punchline again. But inside, I wasn't just hurt, I was taking notes. I remembered every insult, every laugh, every time his friends made me feel small, and he let it happen. It was like I was building a file in my mind, one that grew heavier with each day. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. These weren't accidents. These were patterns. And patterns always reveal the truth. The night started like any other: drinks, loud music, and Malik showing off like he owned the room. His friends were already drunk when we walked in, slapping each other on the back, shouting jokes that felt a little too sharp for a fun night. I tried to laugh with them, to blend in, because for so long I'd been telling myself that this was just how he was with his crew. But the air tasted different that night, heavy and electric, like something was about to break. We sat at a corner table, the kind that hid you but also put you in full view. Malik loved that, the attention, the look on people's faces when he talked. At first he was sweet, leaning close, saying things under his breath that made me smile. Then the drinks hit him, and the charm began to slide away. He started answering his friends' jokes with hits aimed straight at me, like he used me as an easy target to get more laughs. I felt the first sting when he mimicked my laugh, and they roared. I forced a smile and kept my mouth shut. It was a stupid argument about nothing. Whose playlist was better, whose ex did what, and then Malik's voice changed. He leaned forward, eyes glassy, and said something sharp. I didn't even catch the words because his knee came up under the table like a loaded gun. He kicked me hard enough to make me flinch, to spill my drink a little, to lose my breath. For a second the whole room blinked. Then his friends exploded with laughter, slapping the table as if he'd just told the best joke of the night. Humiliation hit harder than the kick. It wasn't the physical pain, it was the way they all looked at me, like I was the punchline, like I deserved it. People around us glanced over, some smirking, some pretending not to notice. Malik laughed loud, the kind of laugh that said, "See? She's dramatic." I wanted to stand up, to shove him, to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I sat there, chest tight, face hot, and felt smaller than I had in years. Inside, something shifted. Not the slow simmer of anger I'd felt before, but a cold, hard clarity. Every joke, every quiet put down, every time I'd swallowed my pride, they all stacked up like stones forming a wall I could no longer ignore. I realized then I had been trying to earn respect from someone who fed off my shame. I had been begging for decency from a man who wore cruelty like a badge. So I went silent. Not the powerless silence of someone waiting for mercy, but a different kind, the silence of someone who's already planning. I watched him fumble with his phone, watched his friends high-five each other for a cruelty that felt childish and cruel. I smiled on the outside, small and polite, but my mind had already started listing ways to make him feel the same hollow, exposed pain he'd handed me. That night didn't end with a fight or a dramatic scene. It ended with me walking out, heels clicking, music swallowing my steps. I left his laugh behind and carried something heavier with me, a quiet promise that the next time he saw me, he wouldn't recognize the woman he thought he could break. Aaliyah's mind became a ledger where every slight was recorded. After that night at the bar, there was no more pretending. Love wasn't what I had with Malik. It was patience with a man who spent my kindness and laughed. I decided to use his own currency back, but smarter. Everything was in my name. The lease, the utilities, the insurance I paid for his car when he said he'd square me up next month. I remembered waking early to move money so rent cleared, turning off lights to save us, making sure bills were paid. He acted like he owned life, but he relied on me for the basics. That was the weakness I needed. I started small and careful. I opened a separate savings account and moved cash in quiet amounts so it wouldn't trigger alerts. I called the bank and confirmed my control over the shared account without telling him. I searched lease rules and learned what the landlord needed to remove an occupant. I saved messages where he mocked me and bragged about humiliating me. I didn't tell friends or family. This had to be private. At work I focused harder. I picked up extra shifts and freelanced on weekends, not for him but for the plan. Each deposit felt like a small triumph. I wrote lists, accounts to freeze, subscriptions charged to my card, registrations with his name I could remove. I printed receipts and backed up screenshots into folders on my laptop. The file sat quiet, waiting. Pretending nothing had changed was the hardest part. Malik still mocked me mornings, still performed for his friends, still acted like I was lucky to be with him. I smiled more than I had in months, cooked when he asked, laughed at jokes that no longer landed. Inside I kept my face steel cold. I answered his jabs with a slow nod, letting him think I was fragile while I tightened things behind the scenes. There was a strange thrill in being invisible and precise. I set appointments with the landlord, learned exact eviction steps, and moved utilities fully under my name. I set alerts so I'd know if he tried to move money or log in where he had no right. Each small action was a step toward the day he would no longer have a roof because of me. I kept telling myself it wasn't cruelty, but reclaiming control. He had made a habit of making me feel small, and I would not disappear into that story. I worked in silence, counting down to the moment I would stop being his soft landing and become the person who pulled the plug. When the time came, the man who kicked me would find himself on the outside, and I would finally feel the steadiness of my own power. I practiced calm, patience, and precision every day, knowing one well-timed move could strip him of comfort and force him to face the consequences of his cruelty. Finally, the night he called me pathetic in front of his friends was the night I stopped pretending I'd forgive him. We were at a rooftop bar they loved because it made them feel important. Malik had been nudging me to cover the tab, saying things like, "Come on, babe, guys got this tonight." I said no, not because I was cheap, but because I was tired of covering for his choices. His friends treated insults like entertainment. When I refused, Darnell leaned over and said, "She's more of a man than Malik," and everyone laughed. Malik didn't defend me. He laughed, slapped Darnell's shoulder, and played along like he'd earned the applause. The sound of their laughter was a physical thing pressing on me, making my face hot. I felt small and seen and exposed, all at once. In the car on the way home, he mumbled the usual. He was sorry, he was drunk, he hadn't meant it. He said the words that had patched things before, and his hand found mine like a ritual. But the apologies were hollow. I'd heard them too many times. Inside, I cataloged every slight, every joke, every time his friends had used me as an accessory to make him look better. The list had grown long. I didn't explode that night. I didn't argue or throw things. I let the humiliation settle, like dust that finds its way into the smallest seams. When we reached our building, he tried again. "Babe, please don't be like this." But I was already 2 steps ahead. I had been planning in silence for weeks, but that moment made me move from planning to certainty. I set a date in my head, 2 weeks from then. That day I would act. The mornings after, I kept my face steady while I tightened the measures no one suspected. I paid certain bills early, shifted money into a separate account I had opened under the pretense of saving, and called the landlord to clarify what paperwork was necessary to remove an occupant. I backed up messages where he bragged about embarrassing me, saved screenshots, and printed them. Every small action felt like reclaiming pieces of myself. It was not about cruelty. I told myself that over and over. It was about refusing to be the person others used for a laugh. I had let his charm and private tenderness cloud the way he behaved publicly, but his public behavior was the real test. If he could humiliate me for a cheap laugh, he didn't value me. The date I set glowed like a decision I couldn't take back. For 2 weeks I wore my patience like armor. Smiles for the cameras of his friends, nods when he boasted, quiet evenings where I pretended not to keep a ledger of slights. But inside, I felt the power of intention. The plan tightened, the accounts were checked, and my resolve hardened. When that day arrived, he would wake to consequences he never expected. The morning of my plan arrived like any other, but inside me everything felt sharper, more awake. Malik was still asleep when I slipped out of bed, his snores rattling the silence. I stood in the kitchen with my phone in hand, heart pounding, but steady. This was the day. No more delays, no more forgiveness. The first call I made was to the bank. I gave them my information, confirmed every detail, and with one sentence froze every shared account Malik thought he had access to. His debit card would stop working by lunchtime, his overdraft vanished, his credit linked to me cut clean. The representative's voice was calm, professional, but to me it sounded like victory. Next, I contacted the landlord. My name was the only one legally binding, but I wanted everything airtight. I filed the paperwork to remove Malik as an occupant, attaching copies of receipts that showed I had paid rent alone for months. By the time the call ended, it was official. The apartment belonged to me and me alone. He had no legal right to step inside once I decided otherwise. Then came the utilities. I logged into each account, electric, water, Wi-Fi, and changed passwords, updated details, cut off his name wherever it appeared. I called the car insurance company and canceled the policy that had been covering his vehicle under my account. It felt surreal, almost surgical, slicing away every cord that tied him to comfort. By the afternoon, Malik was living in a house that wasn't his, wrapped in bills he no longer had access to, driving a car that was no longer insured. And he didn't even know it yet. He thought everything was normal, that his control over me was intact. That ignorance was my edge. I walked through the apartment with black trash bags, pulling his clothes from drawers, his shoes from the closet, his gaming console from under the TV. Each item went into a bag without hesitation. These weren't shared things. They were reminders of his weight in my life. I tied each bag tight and stacked them by the door, neat and final. His presence in my home was reduced to plastic bundles waiting to be dragged out. When I looked around after, the apartment felt different. Lighter, like the air itself had cleared. There was no yelling, no mocking laughter, no footsteps pacing behind me. Just silence, mine alone. For the first time in months, I felt a strange peace blooming in my chest. Malik would come home that evening thinking everything was the same. He would slide his card, try to pay for something, and feel the first sting of confusion. He would twist the door key, step inside, and see his life waiting for him in trash bags. That was the gift I had prepared for him. The slow realization that everything he depended on was gone, and it was all by my hand. Malik's footsteps echoed through the hallway long before I saw him. I was sitting on the couch, sipping my coffee, pretending to scroll through emails, but my ears were tuned to every sound. The first knock came, tentative, confused. Then the door rattled as he tried the key. It barely turned. His face darkened, confusion written all over it. "Hey, what's going on?" he muttered, trying to push the door open. I didn't answer immediately. I waited, letting him struggle with the lock, letting the tension stretch. Finally, he gave up and pulled the door harder. It clicked, but as soon as he stepped inside, his jaw dropped. Trash bags lined the hallway. Clothes, shoes, personal items. Everything he had left in my apartment was now packed, neat, and undeniable. His eyes flicked from the piles to me. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, voice rising. I stayed calm, leaning back on the couch, crossing my legs, watching him unravel. "You kicked me like trash," I said, my voice quiet but cutting. "Now you're the one outside like trash." For a moment, he just stared, as if the words hadn't registered. Then anger flared. "You can't do this. This isn't fair," he barked, stepping closer, fists clenching. But there was no audience this time, no friends laughing behind him, no smirks on anyone's face. It was just him and the truth. "I've been more than fair," I said, keeping my tone even, almost gentle. "I paid the bills, I covered the rent. I kept everything together while you mocked me in front of everyone you thought mattered. I've been patient. Too patient. This isn't cruelty, it's consequence." His hands shook now, not with power, but with panic. He turned, checking the locks, the trash bags, the apartment that was supposed to feel like his. He fumbled with his phone, dialing, swearing under his breath, realizing no one could help him. Not tonight, not ever. I didn't know," he stammered, voice cracking. "Babe, come on. We can fix this. I'll change. Just don't do this." I shook my head slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Change doesn't matter anymore, Malik. I've been patient while you humiliated me, mocked me, and relied on me like I was a doormat. Now you're facing the result of that behavior. You thought you owned me. You didn't even respect me. And now you don't have anything." He tried to grab a bag, drag something back inside, but I stepped in front calmly, letting him see my resolve. His face fell when he realized the truth. Every account frozen, every utility cut, every lease paper filed. He had nowhere to turn. I can't," he muttered, sinking against the wall. His anger drained, replaced by desperation. The man who had laughed at me in bars, who had called me pathetic, who had thought he was untouchable, was now powerless. And I sat there, steady and cold, watching him crumble, knowing this was exactly the moment I had been waiting for. The moment he finally felt the humiliation he had given me, without an audience, without a joke, without an escape. Malik didn't give up right away. For the first few days, he tried every angle, sweet texts, desperate calls, even showing up at the apartment to beg. "Aaliyah, please, I'll change," he'd say, voice breaking, eyes pleading. "I promise I'll be different. Just let me back in." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I could see the truth behind the words. Empty promises wrapped in fear, not regret. I had learned that long ago. His friends, the ones who used to cheer him on when he humiliated me, started fading away too. Calls went unanswered. Invitations to hang out disappeared. When they realized he had no money, no access to the apartment, no credit card to rely on, their support vanished as quickly as it had appeared. The laughter that had once mocked me now left him stranded. I watched from a distance, hearing through mutual acquaintances how they treated him. Ignored, laughed at, left out. Malik's life became a patchwork of instability. Some nights, he slept in his car, curled up on the driver's seat, windows fogged with his breath. Other nights, he crashed on couches of friends who had a soft spot for him, or at least used to. But even that was temporary. He couldn't hold on to anything. He called me once, voice hoarse and desperate. "Aaliyah, I just need a place to stay. Please." I didn't answer. Silence was the only thing he deserved. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching him unravel. Part of me ached for what had once been, for the man who had made me believe in love before he showed his true colors. But the other part, the stronger part, thrived on the justice I had quietly orchestrated. For so long, he had treated me like I was nothing, laughed when I felt small, relied on me without respect. Now, every night he spent sleeping on hard seats or strained couches. Every time he tried to borrow money and got refused, every awkward conversation with friends who no longer wanted him around. It was the same humiliation he had dished out to me, mirrored back. I walked through my apartment, now calm and peaceful, and thought about the nights he kicked, mocked, and laughed at me. I remembered the bar, the rooftop, the way his friends had cheered when he put me down. The satisfaction wasn't in cruelty. It was in balance, in the universe tipping the scales. Even though I felt relief and a quiet satisfaction, I also felt the remnants of sadness. I had loved him once, had believed in the version of Malik that showed tenderness and care. But that version didn't exist anymore. It had been replaced by arrogance and cruelty, and now it was replaced again, by desperation and solitude. I continued living my life, going to work, paying bills, enjoying quiet mornings without fear of his antics. I heard about him through occasional rumors, sleeping in cars, asking strangers for help, friends turning their backs. I didn't gloat. I just let it happen. I let him experience the taste of what he had given me, without interference. For the first time in months, I felt a freedom I hadn't known I could have, a life where his shadow no longer loomed over every decision I made. For the first time in months, I woke up without tension curling in my chest. The apartment was quiet, my space truly mine, and I felt a strange lightness I hadn't felt in years. Malik was gone, his chaos removed, and for the first time, I could focus on me. I decided to use that freedom, not just to revel in his downfall, but to rebuild everything he had tried to break. I started therapy. At first, it was awkward, sitting with someone who didn't know me, spilling all the years I had swallowed in silence. But slowly, the weight began to lift. I spoke about the humiliation, the subtle jabs, the open betrayals. Each session was like pulling out a thorn I had ignored for far too long. I realized how much I had bent myself into someone who tolerated disrespect, someone who allowed her voice to be muted. Therapy didn't just help me heal. It taught me how to set boundaries I had never enforced before. I reconnected with my family, the people who had always loved me unconditionally. I had distanced myself for months, caught up in the chaos of pretending everything was fine. Now their support was a balm. We laughed again, shared meals, and slowly rebuilt the trust one had hidden away. I learned to accept care, to accept kindness without guilt. Work became my second therapy. I poured myself into projects I had once postponed, ideas I had kept to myself. Promotions came, praise from colleagues I respected, and an energy in me that I hadn't realized was stifled by years of worrying about someone who didn't deserve it. Each achievement reminded me that my life was mine to shape, not his to influence. And in quiet moments, I reflected on everything I had ignored, the red flags, the jokes, the kicks, the sneers. I remembered nights spent wondering if I was overreacting, questioning my own perception. I promised myself never again. Never would I tolerate someone undermining me in private or in public. Never would I let fear or love blind me to disrespect. I had learned the cost of silence, and I refused to pay it again. One day, a message came from Malik. Simple, pleading, just like before. "Can we talk? I miss you. Please." My hand hovered over the phone, a flash of old anger and old sadness passing through me. But I didn't answer. Not this time. Silence was my choice. Silence was my power. I didn't need to explain, argue, or forgive. I simply continued living. I exercised, I journaled, I nurtured friendships I had neglected, and I allowed myself to dream without limits. Malik's absence wasn't a void. It was a space I could fill with strength, self-respect, and ambition. And in that quiet, I realized something profound. Healing wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming myself. For the first time, I felt whole, untethered from someone who had tried to diminish me. My life was mine, and I would never give that power away again. Revenge isn't about cruelty. That's the first thing I want anyone listening to understand. It's about reclaiming power, about taking back control when someone has spent years chipping away at your confidence, your dignity, and your sense of self. I never wanted Malik to suffer for the sake of suffering. I wanted him to feel the consequences of his arrogance, the same way I felt the sting of his betrayal for so long. I can still picture him clearly in my mind. The smirk that once made me trust him, the confidence that masked his insecurities, the way he thought he could humiliate me in public and still come home to me obedient and quiet. That same man, who laughed at me in bars and belittled me at dinner tables, ended up with nothing. He had no money, no apartment, no friends eager to support him, no one to validate his arrogance. He was reduced to scrambling, desperate, powerless. And he brought it all on himself. The satisfaction didn't come from watching him suffer in a mean-spirited way. It came from the quiet justice of it. He had relied on me, on my work, on my patience, and had taken it all for granted. He thought he could treat me like an accessory, and now he was invisible. There were no audiences, no laughter, no cheers. Just him, facing the emptiness that had once been my reality when I endured his cruelty. It was the perfect balance, the kind of clarity you feel when everything you've suffered becomes a teacher rather than a chain. I remember standing in the hallway that last day, the trash bags of his belongings stacked neatly by the door. I watched him look at them, realize he had nowhere to go, and for the first time, I didn't feel fear or anger. I felt power. Not over him, but over my own life, my own choices. I realized that the strongest act wasn't the kickback, the frozen accounts, or the eviction. The strongest act was reclaiming my space, my finances, my freedom, and walking away without looking back. I closed the door on him that day, slowly, deliberately. The sound of the latch clicking into place echoed like a punctuation mark on the story of us. It wasn't just a door. It was the final barrier between his cruelty and my peace. It was a statement to the universe, to him, and to myself that I was no longer his victim, no longer anyone's doormat. And as I walked away, I whispered words that had carried me through every step of this journey. When he kicked me, he thought he was showing strength. But the strongest thing I ever did was walk away and make sure he had nowhere to follow. Those words weren't about pride or ego. They were about survival, resilience, and the quiet, unshakable power that comes from refusing to be small for someone else's entertainment. I had lost nothing. He had lost everything. And I finally felt free. Do you think Aaliyah made the right choice by cutting Malik out of her life completely? Or should she have given him another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear what you think. And if you love stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another one.